afternoon. How's everybody doing? Great to be learning with you on a Monday special time because it's Erev Tisha B'Av. We'd rather not be studying Torah this evening as we're heading into Tisha B'Av. And for that same reason, we will not have class tomorrow. So after today's class, we'll see you again, God willing, on Wednesday at the regular time, 6 p.m. Pacific. Let's light up the darkness. Who's in the house on a Monday? Yom Sheni. Bill in Mid-Missouri, Bella in Florida, Sharon in New Jersey, Joe in the Inland Empire, Lorraine in Texas, Tom in Pennsylvania, Yitzhak in Minnesota, excuse me, Marjorie in Georgia, Yelanit in Silver Spring, Joseph in Nevada. Ella's with us. Welcome, everybody. Reload Facebook. Okay. Another short daf. Isn't it amazing? It's funny, the longest dafs, the longest pages, are actually right at the beginning of Daf Yomi. And brachas, they're very, very long pages. We're just doing a whole daf, very difficult, in under an hour. Usually, there's just kind of like more or less a standard length where we can usually, do it 40, 45 minutes, have a comfortable time for questions. Sometimes longer, sometimes shorter, but these dafs, just a string of very short ones, pretty unusual. Okay, our daf today is page 54 here in Tractate Bava Basra, the 23rd volume of the Talmud. We're still continuing our discussion of Mishna number 4 in chapter 3. And we've been talking about generally establishing a presumption of ownership over a property, whether it's real property or objects. And just the last few days, we've been talking about, well, how do you establish that possession of a property? Now, that can be for the purpose of, residing there for 3 years. And then in the absence of a deed, you would still have the presumption of ownership against somebody who came and claimed. But if there was no competing claim and you wanted to just, take possession of it, particularly in the case of ownerless property, so what kind of an action do you need to take on the land so that you can demonstrate to the world your intent to take possession of that property? And as we'll see today, it's not merely making use of an item on the property or taking something from the property, but there actually has to be some improvement, right? It's not enough to exploit the property. You need to somehow improve the property, as we shall see. So right at the bottom of page 53b, Rabbi Yirmiyah Bira says that Rabbi Yehuda says, with regard to this person, now we're in 54a, who threw turnip seeds in the crevices of the land of a convert who died without heirs. So again, somebody who didn't leave heirs, therefore his property became ownerless. And then anyone could come along and claim it. So this guy came and he just threw some seeds on it. Now the seeds ended up taking root. But what he didn't do is prepare, dig a hole, plant the seeds, water them. He just threw some seeds on the property. They probably wouldn't have germinated, but they did. Now, since they did germinate, can we say that this guy took possession of the property? And the answer is no. This guy who just threw turnip seeds and they landed in the crevices of the land of a convert who died without heirs, this is not sufficient to take possession. And what is the reason for this? Because at the time that he threw the seeds, there was no enhancement to the value of the field. So we're seeing enhancement versus exploitation. Now that the turnips have grown and the value of the field is enhanced, he could argue, well, my seeds enhance the field, but he didn't demonstrate that intent when he just threw the seeds more or less out the window. It's almost like you just threw an apple core away on a piece of property, not even knowing that it was ownerless, and that apple core, the seeds ended up going into the soil, and a little apple tree germinated, and you're like, then when you find out it was ownerless, like, hey, wait, that's my apple tree. I enhanced the land. But you didn't demonstrate an intent to plant a tree there, and so you didn't take an action that resulted in your taking possession of that land. Now, the Gemara records a string of rulings with regard to taking possession of land. Shmuel says, And today we'll talk about the Rav and Shmuel. So Rav and Shmuel, very famous Amoraim, living in the Jewish community in Bava, right? So which is within the Persian Empire. This is sages of the Gemara, later than sages of the Mishna, but really two of the most prominent Amoraim. And they often debated with each other. So Shmuel says, with regard to this one, meaning this person who cuts the branches of a palm tree. Okay, so there was ownerless property, and there was a palm tree on that property, and he cut branches from that palm tree. Did he take possession of that property? Depends what he was thinking when he cut the palm branches. If he had in mind the benefit of the palm tree, then he has acquired it. But if he had in mind the benefit of the animals, meaning to feed his animals with those branches, then he has not acquired it. Okay? So if he was thinking, I will take possession of this land, and what am I going to do? I'm going to trim the trees. Right? I'm going to do a little bit of lawn work, yard work, enhance the value of those trees. They're overgrown. Here in LA, you see all the time, there are palm trees, and the nature of them, I think these are called royal palms. I'm not even sure the names of them. I should know, we have one in front of our house. But the palm leaves come out, and then they die, and they kind of just die and lie alongside the trunk, and then new ones grow up at the top. And the tree sort of leaves behind a beard of dead palm fronds, and eventually it's like a huge, very heavy collection of dead palm leaves that are sort of gathered around in this kind of beard, but it's huge and heavy on these very tall palm trees, and it can be quite dangerous because the whole thing can fall, and if a person or a car is standing there, it can do serious damage. So to protect against that, every now and then you'll send up a professional tree cutter who will trim away those branches. Somebody who does that is certainly enhancing the value of the property. But somebody who walks into the woods and trims some branches from ownerless property so that he can feed his animal, that person does not have in mind to enhance the land. So he can't take possession of land through that action, is what Shmuel is telling us. So the Gemara asks, what are the circumstances in which it can be known what he has in mind? After all, if all he did is walk onto the property and cut some palm branches, how do you know what he was cutting it for? So the Gemara answers, if he took branches from this side and from that side, so then he had in mind the acquisition of the palm tree, as this assists the growth of the tree. But if the branches that he took were all from one side, then he had in mind the benefit of the animals that he's, feeding by cutting those leaves. And Shmuel says, with regard to this person who clears a field of trees, if he had in mind the improvement of the field, in other words, to prepare it for plowing, so then he has acquired the field. But if he had in mind the collection of the wood for himself to take somewhere else, then he has not acquired the field. He acquired the wood because it was ownerless, but he didn't acquire the field. Gemara asks, what are the circumstances in which can be known what he had in mind? And the Gemara answers, if he took large and small pieces of wood, then he had in mind the improvement of the field. However, if he took the large pieces of wood but left the small ones, then you can infer that he was collecting firewood. And Shmuel also says, with regard to this person who removes protuberances and levels the ground, if he had in mind the improvement of the field to prepare it for plowing, he has acquired the field. But if he had in mind the conversion of the field into a threshing floor, then he has not acquired it. And the Gemara asks, what are the circumstances at which can be known what he had in mind? And the Gemara answers, if he took a mound and threw it in a ditch, thereby leveling both areas, he had in mind the improvement of the field. But if he leveled the ground with a mound in the place of a mound and a ditch in the place of a ditch, expanding each area but leaving the field as a whole uneven, then he had in mind the conversion of the field into a threshing floor. And Shmuel says with regard to this person who opened a blockage and enabled water to enter into a section of land, if he had in mind the improvement of the field in order to irrigate it, so he has acquired the field. But if he had in mind the catching of the fish, i.e. to enable the water to flow in so that he could catch the fish therein, he has not acquired it, right? He was just trying to exploit that land to take something out of it. He wasn't having in mind, oh, this is ownerless property and I would like to acquire it for myself and become the property owner. And by the way, not everybody wants to be a property owner because then you have to pay taxes and all kinds of other responsibilities. So maybe somebody was just walking onto a known piece of ownerless property and he just wanted to harvest some wood for it or some leaves or some feed for his animals, etc. He didn't demonstrate any intent to acquire the field as a landowner. But if he takes actions like irrigating the field or leveling the field or removing trees, weeds, etc., then he's demonstrating that intent. Okay, and the Gemara relates that an incident. There was a certain woman who profited from an ownerless palm tree by cutting its branches for 13 years. So for 13 years, she was taking branches from this palm tree. Was she trying to improve the palm tree? No, she just knew it was ownerless and she was taking branches from it and using them to feed her animal. Another person came and plowed beneath it a bit. In other words, he did some kind of work in the ground around the palm tree that was beneficial to the palm tree. The case came before the sage Levi, and some say it came before Mar Ukva, who established the property in the possession of the one who plowed. And the woman came and shouted before him, the sage, protesting the perceived injustice of his ruling. And the sage said to her, "What can I do for you? As you did not take possession of the property in the manner that people take possession. You were just taking stuff off that tree. You didn't do the kinds of acts that legally constitute taking possession of the tree. Somebody else did that, and once he took possession, he told you you can no longer take branches from his tree." Tough luck. Rav says, this is very interesting, one who draws an image. For example, he paints an image on the wall, on the property of a convert who died without heirs, on ownerless property. This one who draws an image on that wall has acquired the property, as Rav himself acquired the garden of the house of Rav, which had been ownerless property, only by drawing an image, right? You can say that he enhanced the property by painting a mural on it. This is where, imagine if graffiti artists could claim a piece of property by tagging it. It's a little bit similar, but of course it had to be established as ownerless property before that could happen. New subject. It was stated with regard to a field that is defined by its boundaries, i.e. it has clearly demarcated boundaries on all sides. Rav Huna says that Rav says, once he struck the land with a hoe one time, he acquired the entire property, right? This is a field that has clear borders. We know where it begins and ends. And he did a tiny bit of farming, right? Hoeing, plowing on that field. So then he acquired the whole field because he demonstrated an intent to enhance the field. And that applies to the whole field. And Shmuel says that he has acquired only the place that he struck with the hoe, which turns out to be like one furrow. But he didn't acquire the whole field. That's what Shmuel says. Now, as I said earlier, Rav and Shmuel often had debates with each other. And the general rule is that in cases of monetary law, we follow the rulings of Shmuel. And in other cases, like ritual law, we follow the rulings of Rav. In this case, which is a monetary case, taking possession of a field, we follow the ruling of Rav. Right? That as soon as you put the hoe in anywhere in the field and demonstrate some intent to plow the field, you take possession of the whole field if it had been established as being ownerless. Now we're on 54b. And if the field is not defined by its boundaries, right, it's kind of an open field and you're not clear where the field begins and ends, then up to how much of the field is acquired by one strike of the hoe. And in that case, Rav Papa said he acquires as far as an ox driver goes and returns, i.e. the size of a standard furrow beginning where the hoe entered the ground. New subject. Rav Yehuda says that Shmuel says, with regard to the property of a Gentile that was sold to a Jew for money, it is ownerless like a desert until the purchaser performs an act of acquisition. Very strange ruling. And anyone who takes possession of it in the interim has acquired it. Very strange, right? So a Gentile, he is bound by the laws of the kingdom in which he lives. The whatever the laws apply to him. He's not bound by Torah law. I mean, unless he is a ger toshav, the resident alien, right, living in Israel at the time that Israel is ruled by Torah law, then he submits to live under Torah law. But in most cases, like in other countries, the Jews have to follow the laws of the land. We're going to say that in one moment. The dina de malchusa dina, the law of the land is the law, right? So Jews have to obey the laws of the countries that they live in. And of course, they're also bound by Torah law. That the Gentiles in that land are not bound by Torah law. So here we have a case where the Gentile in his land assumes that as soon as you pay him, you give him the money for a field, the purchaser has acquired it. Now, as we've discussed many times, we under Torah law require a kinyan, a formal act of acquisition. So the fact that the Jew gave money to the Gentile does not mean that the Jew has already acquired the land. He has to now take possession of the land. And if some other Jew comes along and takes possession, does an act of acquisition on that land, in between the time that the Gentile received the money and the buyer went and took possession for himself, then this other guy actually took possession, right? Now, this is easily avoided, right? The Jew, at the time that he gives money to the Gentile, he doesn't announce the purchase until he himself has done some kind of formal act of acquisition. It's kind of a quirk in the law, but it's an important quirk, and it is the law. So let's continue. So what is the reason for this? Because the Gentile relinquishes ownership of it from the moment when the money reaches his hand, according to his law, while the Jew who purchased it does not acquire it until the deed for the land reaches his hand. That's one form of acquisition, that he receives the document, the deed of sale. Another is a handkerchief, another is taking possession, etc. But until that happens, the Jew who's purchasing hasn't acquired the land. Therefore, in that period of time between the giving of the money and the receiving of the deed, the property is like a desert, meaning it's ownerless, and anyone who takes possession of it has acquired it. Now Abaye said to Rav Yosef, did Shmuel actually say this? But doesn't Shmuel say that the law of the kingdom is the law, dina de malchusa dina? I.e., the law, our law, obligates Jews to observe the laws of the locale in which they reside. And the king said that land may not be acquired without a document. Therefore, taking possession should not be effective for acquisition. And Rav Yosef said to him, I do not know how to reconcile this contradiction. But there was an incident in the village of Dura that was founded by shepherds, where there was a Jew who purchased land from a Gentile by giving money, and in the interim another Jew came and plowed it a bit. And the two Jews came before Rav Yehuda for a ruling, and he established the property in the possession of the second individual. And this accords with the ruling of Shmuel that the property was ownerless until a Jew performed an act of acquisition. In this case, another Jew got in there ahead of the Jew who had given money to the Gentile. And Abaye said to him, are you saying that the incident occurred in Dura that was founded by shepherds? Proof cannot be brought from any case of land that was purchased in the city of Dura that was founded by shepherds, as in that locale, the fields were concealed, since the owners of the fields would not pay the land tax to the king. And the king says that one who pays land tax may profit from the field. Therefore, in that case, the Gentile who sold the property did not actually own it. He had relinquished his ownership of the land because he never paid taxes on it. And so what he sold, in a sense, he was in the position of a robber. It wasn't his to sell. That land was ownerless. The Jew who went in and plowed it a bit and took possession of it also acquired not only the land, but the obligation to pay taxes on it. right? So there's more to the story than initially met the eye. Now the Gemara relates, Rav Huna purchased land from a Gentile. Another Jew came along and plowed it slightly. Rav Huna and that Jew came before Rav Nachman, who established the property in the possession of the Jew who came along and plowed it. And Rav Huna said to Rav Nachman, what are you thinking in issuing this ruling? Is it because Shmuel says that the property of a Gentile is like a desert and anyone takes possession of it has acquired it? If so, if that's what you're thinking, then the master should do for me in accordance with another statement of Shmuel. As Shmuel says, and I'm almost done. Questions or comments, please get them in now. As Shmuel says that one who hoes ownerless property has acquired only the place that he struck with the hoe. Right? In other words, we said earlier that Rav says one strike of the hoe gives you the whole field. Shmuel says only the one row. But we follow Rav. So you're going to say you're going to make me a ruling in accordance with Shmuel about Dina de Malhusa Dina, and the land is ownerless. That the land is ownerless in between giving the money and taking possession. Well, then you also have to follow Shmuel with regard to how much land the guy who plowed acquired. Rav Nachman said to him, in this matter, I hold in accordance with our law, our halacha. As Rav Huna says that Rav says, once he struck the land with a hoe one time, he acquired the entire property. Yeah, Shmuel doesn't hold by that, but that's the law. So I'm following the law. And the Gemara relates that Rav Huna bar Avin sent a ruling. In the case of a Jew who purchased a field from a Gentile, and then another Jew came and took possession of it, it is not removed from the possession of the second Jew. And so too, Rabbi Avin and Rabbi Ilya, and all of our rabbis agree with regard to this matter, right? And it's, it sounds a little unfair, but it's not, because Jews are bound by Torah law. So if you're going to do a transaction with a non-Jew, okay, well then you're going to have to know what laws he's bound by and make sure that you observe those laws. And you're going to have to know what laws Jews are bound by and make sure that you observe those laws. If there's a contradiction between those laws, you're going to have to check with a rabbi and see how to deal with it. And then the whole problem could have been avoided, right? Like I said, if he gave the money and knowing that the property is not going to be formally acquired by him until he takes some kind of active acquisition, either receiving the deed from the Gentile or plowing something, he makes sure that those things happen, close enough in time that nobody else can waltz in. But if he just, gave the money to the Gentile and said, I'll come back, next year and start farming it, well, then he's setting himself up for this kind of problem. Okay, that's what I've got for today. Let me see. Nina is out, so let me scan the comments for questions. Joe says, when the wind blows, palm fronds can travel at least half a block away, causing safety issues. For sure they can go half a block away easily. Also, dead palm fronds are a terrible fuel source to spread fires. Yep. And like I said, kind of like next to the sidewalk in front of our house is this very tall palm tree. It's a royal palm. It's those really tall, skinny ones like you see, in pictures of LA. And when winds blow hard, those palm fronds come down. And then also on our tree, there are sycamore trees. And these palm fronds get stuck in very high branches because the palm tree is so tall. Very high branches of the sycamores. And it's quite unsightly. And they're stuck up there for a long time until people, either more wind blows or people trim their sycamores or, it's a problem. So, yeah, like at somewhat regular intervals, we got to send a guy up there for the benefit of our neighbors and to get rid of all those dead fronds. Bill, why is creating a threshing floor not considered enhancement? That is a great question. I was thinking the same thing. I think the reason that they're saying there, I thought that, I was always picturing that threshing floor was like a barn or something. I had it totally wrong. But I guess a threshing floor is almost like a, like a circus tent. It's like a temporary thing. And like an ownerless field is just the kind of place where you might set that up. Like the kind of place where a carnival might pitch its place or a circus might pitch the tent. I get the feeling that you might create a threshing floor in an area that's temporarily uninhabited, do the business. You're not creating a permanent place for that threshing floor. But Bill continues, not only could one thresh one's own grain there, but at least it's used for other farmers to do this, but lease its use for other farmers to do the same, and thus establish a continued productive income. Yeah, what you're saying seems totally logical to me. I'm guessing, from the way it's stated, that a threshing floor doesn't establish. It must be that that's considered a temporary use that just really exploits the property, but doesn't enhance it. Karen says a palm like that in Berkeley was a nest site for owls for several years, and they were a famous neighborhood attraction, like I guess inside that beard. What's also interesting is when I talked to the tree guy, who went up it. I mean, the beard, like if you don't trim those trees for a long time, that beard can be 20, 30, 40, 50 feet of hanging beard. You know what I'm saying? It's very large. And it can be very high up. And then, as I said, it can fall at all that danger. I was talking to the guy who was bringing all that down, and he said it's totally disgusting up there. And you get the droppings of animals within that beard. It's like a place where animals hide. Now, if squirrels or something were building a nest there, not very surprising. But he said that they often find rats. Thank God he didn't find an art palm tree. But that rats go up there. I just wouldn't have imagined that rats climb palm trees. But yeah, another interesting detail. Now, Tom is saying, so someone else could plow the rest of the field, leaving it with co-owners. So that would seem like if we followed Shmuel, where you just the fact that you plowed part of it didn't mean that you took possession of the whole field, or in a field that doesn't have distinct boundaries, that you only took basically you took the part that you plowed. So does that mean that if you only took the part that you plowed, then other people could plow other parts, and that field would end up getting divided, and then it would have multiple owners? Sounds like that's what would happen. A lot of discussion on palm trees. Joe says, at one time we had a Mexican fan palm in the front yard. At various times, owls, pigeons, doves, and even vermin lived there. With the Santa Ana wind spreading fire so readily, I chose to have it removed. No birds were displaced, and I'm so glad that I did. Very good. Gary Markowitz says, good morning, Sal. Did you feel the earthquake? Was there one today? I did feel the one last week. I think it was last week, like early last week. Nina and I, it was in the evening. It was like 7:30 at night. We had like a 5-point-something earthquake. Its center was actually pretty far north of LA. But ever since 1994, the Northridge earthquake, I'm so sensitive to it. And I felt it sitting at the dining table. And then the way you confirm if you're in an earthquake is if you have a hanging light, any kind of light hanging from the ceiling, it'll start moving. And the light over our dining table was moving. So I said, yeah, that's an earthquake. And Nina was standing just, a few feet away, like she never felt it. So some people are sort of tuned into earthquakes and some not. But yeah, generally speaking, please God, more small earthquakes, please, right? Because, what's going on in California is the outer edge of California is a piece of land that's heading north. And earthquakes in California, every time there's a slip, like it builds up pressure, and then slips. And that slip is an earthquake. So the more there's little slips, the more it releases pressure, and we don't have big earthquakes because we don't want big earthquakes. Okay. And over on the YouTube side was our question. Joseph, I've been thinking for some time in this tractate about this ties into property ownership in Israel. I was taught while in the land that planting trees can gain you ownership. I mean, yes, right? Planting trees will get you ownership of ownerless land. Now, in modern Israel, I mean, that's not gonna work, right? All of the land is spoken for by somebody. whether it's the government or private ownership, and taking possession of land in Israel is problematic. But there are many organizations that plant trees in Israel, and then you can certainly spiritually, symbolically feel like you have ownership in the land. I think those efforts are not as big now as when I was a kid. It was a big deal. Like the JNF, the Jewish National Fund, was planting trees, I think especially in the north, which is a very different climate than the south in Israel, which is more desert-like. And I don't know if it's still available, but Nina bought me for my birthday one year a square cubit on Mount Carmel. So some guy bought some plot of land on Mount Carmel, right? So where Elijah prophesied and had that whole incident where he challenged the idolatrous priests, and none of them could summon fire. And Elijah, took a cow during a drought, poured water on it, then summoned holy fire and demonstrated to all Israel that God is God, etc. That whole incident happened on Mount Carmel in the north. And you could buy, maybe it's still possible, Google it, you can buy a square cubit of land in Israel, right? So a piece of land that large, and you get a deed, right? So it's hanging on our wall in our dining room, Salvador Litvak's square cubit in the land of Israel. It doesn't mean that we only celebrate one day Hag, right? People in Israel do one day of Shavuos, one day on the first day of Sukkot, one day on the first day of Passover. Outside of Israel, 2 days. If you're a landowner in Israel, then even if you're visiting, your cousins in America, you would still celebrate one day Chag. But owning the square cubit on Mount Carmel doesn't make me that kind of a landowner where I change the way I observe holidays. Okay, we went a little bit afield there, so to speak. That's what I've got for us today. My friends, tonight begins Tisha B'Av. And the Gemara teaches elsewhere that those who mourn the destruction of the temple with a real mourning, with real feeling, that what we've lost, the loss of the temple from our midst, the inability to perform so many laws that are specified in the Torah, the manifest presence of the Shekhinah, the divine presence in Jerusalem when the temples stood, what we lost there, and that we lost it, because of baseless hatred among the Jews. I mean, we've lost so much. And there were so many other calamities that happened on this day in history: the expulsion of the Jews from England in 1290, from Spain in 1492, the beginning of World War I, which was a sort of chain of events that really ultimately culminated in the Holocaust in World War II. The sin of the spies, bringing a false report about the land, and the panic of the children of Israel in the wilderness that led to them having to spend 40 years in the wilderness. We have to feel these calamities in history. We're going to be fasting. It's a full fast like Yom Kippur. But we have to remember to feel the sadness and cry out to God. And was there ever a Tisha B'Av like this in our lifetimes, when literally there is a radical murderous regime, right, in what used to be the seat of the Persian Empire in Iran, threatening to destroy Israel and threatening to attack Jews around the world with terrorist attack right now. I mean, it literally could happen on Tisha B'Av. Please God, we had a Simchas Torah on October 7th that was like Tisha B'Av in the attack that we had. May this Tisha B'Av be like Simchas Torah. May we only hear good news. May Mashiach come and turn, and what we, we've long taught, that the sages have long taught, that when Mashiach comes, when the Messiah comes, Tisha B'Av will become a holiday. Let it be this year. Let it be this year. And we say, Amen. Please God help us. Amen. And may we only hear good news. Amen. All the best, my holy sisters and brothers. And God willing, we'll be together again to learn at the regular time on Wednesday.